3 o'clock. Hey, welcome to Amp Up Solar Talk, where we break down all things solar to help you own your own power. I'm Kelly with Signature Solar, and today we're talking battery maintenance, an essential factor in keeping your system running smoothly. Now, lithium-ion batteries are low maintenance, but proper care is essential for long-term efficiency and proper performance and longevity. Now, from balancing to troubleshooting, common issues still arise. And today we've got Phillip, a technical solutions associate here at Signature Solar, who deals with customers every day who are running through these challenging tasks. So Phillip, thanks for being here. Welcome to the show.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And if you have questions, be sure and drop them in the chat. Phillip's here to help answer your questions. So Phillip, being in technical solutions, you guys get lots of support calls. What percentage would you say are related to battery issues?
Probably I'd say at least 30%, maybe more. And they're not always battery problems. They're not always issues, but battery maintenance is important to everybody because they're expensive and they're a key component of your system. And they're designed to last a long time. And so you want to take care of them and get the most out of them.
Absolutely. So what are the most common battery related issues that customers are running into?
So nowadays it's more BMS calibration and management and that's the computer inside the battery that takes care of the cells. And it's more of those because lead acid batteries, they need to be cycled in order for the chemistry inside them, in order to burn off things that it needs to burn off so they can stay at full capacity. But lithium iron phosphate batteries, they don't really need that. You just have to teach the computer what is empty and what is full so it can do its job.
And the BMS manages all of that?
Yes, it does. Yeah, the BMS is inside the battery and it gives you things like cell voltages and amp hour capacity remaining, and it does that through calculations, and then it spits it out in a easily digestible SOC for people to look at. So state of charge.
Okay, so how do you teach the BMS where the battery is?
Yeah, so you teach the BMS basically by just using the battery. So there are certain ways to teach it what 0 is and ways to teach it what 100 is, and that's you need to get a cell undervolted or overvolted, and then it will teach the battery what percentage it's at. But basically you do it through use. You just use it down and then charge it back up to the appropriate voltage, and over time it learns what its range is and what state of charge it should be at.
So when do you do that? Do you do that when you just hook it up and you start using it?
Yeah, you definitely want to do it when you first get a battery. You want to cycle it at least 7-10 times, and then you want to do it regularly too. About once a month, it's recommended, I think, to discharge the battery and charge it back. Cycle it.
So when you're saying cycling, what do you mean by that?
I mean, take it down to whatever the recommended amp hour capacity is. So for most batteries, they boast a 80% depth of discharge, and that means you can use 80% of the amp hour capacity of that battery on a regular basis without affecting longevity at all. So you want to just you want to use 80% of the amp hour capacity and then charge it all the way back up. That's a cycle.
And when you say all the way back up, does that mean 100%?
Yeah, it means 100%, but also it depends on the amp hour capacity of the battery. So we have some 100 amp hour batteries that we sell, some 200, some 400, some 280. So we were using the 100 amp hour as a reference. So 100% is its full amp hour capacity, depending on its rating.
And so the BMS over time will generally get more and more accurate the more you do that.
When used correctly, it does, yeah. And then the opposite is true too. So if you're not cycling the battery and you leave it at its full capacity for a long time, it will learn that this is normal and when I get discharged, its SOC will drop quicker. So it does both depending on how you use it.
Okay, now I heard you say it will also learn when 0% is, but we're never actually getting it to 0%.
So 0% we may get there. We shouldn't get to 0 amp hour capacity left. So you should always have some of its capacity remaining, even if the screen or the lights or whatever is showing you the SOC says 0. It means it's learned 0, not it's true. I have no amp hour capacity left.
Okay, so our recommended depth of discharge is what we're saying is our 0%.
Yes.
Okay. We do have a question that is coming in from Jake Lawson. He says, is there anything I can do to make my batteries last longer, specifically in a colder climate?
Yeah, so we have lots of people who install little heaters, some of them off the battery themselves, some of them are off the inverter or whatever you're using as a power source, but just keeping them comfortable instead of stressing them out. It's very hard for batteries to charge when they're cold, and as they get colder, it gets harder for them to charge, and you don't want it to stress it out when you try to charge it. So just keep it warm, not too warm. Keep it at a regular temperature so that it doesn't have to stress the charge or anything like that.
So a heated environment.
Heated or cooled, you don't want it to get too hot or cold. They have a pretty wide range of temperatures where they can operate at, but you just want to make sure it doesn't get super cold, freezing.
Okay. Mark wants to know, should I change my battery to 80% full or 100% full? And then with my EV, they say to only charge to 80%.
With your EV, like your car, so they may have a different chemistry makeup in that battery. And some batteries, it's better, and it depends on if you're going to store it or use it too. If you're going to store a battery, you don't want it as full. But if you plan on using it directly after, then taking it up all the way is okay.
Okay. East Texas, Joe McConaughey, he says, I have 3 of the indoor batteries. Do I need to get them all to a similar level before paralleling them?
Yeah, really good question. It's definitely a good idea to get them as close as possible. Generally, we say within a half a volt of each other before you parallel them, and that's just because when you read the bank as a whole, you're going to read kind of an average of all the batteries.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're going to try to charge up to a certain level, it's important that they be relatively close to each other so that it can get an accurate reading on where they are as a group.
When you say relatively close, what percentage are we talking about?
We say normally within a half a volt, but the closer, the better.
Okay. So in your experience, what do you wish more people understood about how batteries work or how to maintain them?
Yeah, mostly the difference between the two charge and discharge curves between lead acid and lithium iron phosphate or lithium batteries, because if you look at a lead acid discharge curve, it's more linear, almost a straight diagonal with a slight curve to it.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at a lithium iron phosphate discharge curve, you can see as it approaches full or empty, the drop or climb is very, very steep, and it's more of a wave. And so it's hard to understand, and this is why SOC is easier to understand than voltage, because you'll look at a lithium battery and it will go from 54 volts to 52 volts, which is only a 2-volt swing, but you could lose 60 or 70% of your amp hour capacity within those 2 volts. So they just have different chemical makeups, and they behave differently. So
is that the same reason why when your battery gets low that it seems like you lose so much at the very end? With my cell phone, even I notice it seems to go faster when I don't have much charge.
Yeah, that is exactly the reason why. So you could start using your battery when it's at 51 volts, and the next thing you know, it's at 47 or 46 volts, and that's because you only had 15 or 10% remaining anyway before you were out. And That is the way they behave. They drop voltage very quickly at the very end of their discharge cycle. So
I think, we use cell phones every day, and I know lithium ion and iron phosphate are very different, but we don't truly really understand how batteries work. So I really appreciate this conversation.
yeah, and on your point of cell phones, we see it all the time, or we used to see it a lot more before they got better at showing their SOC. Because if you left a cell phone on the charger and it was at 100% always, and then you take it off and you start to use it, you see your battery drain very quickly, and that's because it's learned that this is 100% and I never go down here, so I don't even know what that bottom end looks like. So,
Well, even then, when you're charging it,
mhm.
that last little bit takes so much longer to get it to
Does.
100%.
And that part of that is for cell balancing too. So if you want cells to balance inside the battery, you need to do it at a slow amperage or a slower rate of charge than you would for a bulk charge cycle at the bulk. So you do it slower so that you give the cells time to balance between themselves. And the BMS handles that too. It handles active balancing and passive balancing.
So let's talk about that a little bit and talk about the differences between charging one battery versus charging a bank of batteries. How does that relate?
So part of that depends on whether you're in closed loop BMS communication with the inverter or whatever you're charging with too. Because when you're in closed loop communication, each BMS takes its data and shares it with the inverter, so that the inverter knows I have one battery here, one here, and I need to send this much charge to all three. So when you're in open loop communication, the BMSs still take care of each set of cells, each battery, but they don't relay individual data to the inverter, so it reads that bank as a whole and just sends a charge, and it just divides up between the batteries.
So would you say there's more maintenance that I need to do as my administrator on an open loop system?
There may be slightly more maintenance. Most of it comes with the initial install and settings. When you're in a closed loop system, you don't have to worry about setting voltages or limiting amperage in any way, because the BMS will relay those limits and set its own charge voltage. But in an open loop, you need to look at the battery spec sheets and put in the appropriate values, and then occasionally you'll want to look at each battery individually and make sure that they're staying equal to each other.
Okay. Operama Gold, it says, is there a way to revitalize or restore a dead solar battery?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this is probably our battery calls that are problems. This is probably a good percentage of those, because a lot of the times when a battery goes dead, it's not actually dead. It's just so critically low that the BMS that controls it won't allow it to stay on long enough to take a charge.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things you can do is, even when the BMS won't stay on and allow it to charge, it will let through a very small amount of amperage. We call it trickle charging. So you can get a separate charger and trickle charge it to bring it back to life. A lot of the times you can't do that with the inverter because it's a safety feature. An inverter wants to see 48 volts or close to 48 volts before it will send a whole lot of amperage there, just to be safe. So a lot of the times you have to get a separate charger, an external charger that will allow you to bring it back to life. But sometimes you can just have it all set up and ready to charge as you turn the battery on. And as soon as you turn the BMS on, if it's not drawing off the cells, but gets an external charge instead, it will come to life. So you can do it either one of those ways.
Okay. So I know that there are things that I have to do to maintain my car, right? I know that I have to change my oil every 3,000 to 6,000 miles. I know that I'm not supposed to drive my car until I run out of gas. I've got to watch that gas tank, right? So I don't have a solar system. Hopefully I'll get one day, but I know in my mind that I'm not going to wait until I lose electricity to go check on my batteries.
Right.
But How do we know when there's a battery problem? Is there regular maintenance that we should be doing to our batteries to make sure there's not any issues? Are we waiting until we get a red light on our inverter that says there's a problem? What kind of maintenance should we be
Right.
doing?
I definitely wouldn't recommend waiting until you get a problem that pops up to check on your batteries. They should be checked on regularly, at least once a month, probably more often than that even. You should go out and check on your batteries and make sure that they're all charging and discharging. If they're not perfectly in line, that's okay. Allow for a 10% or 15% variance of charge and discharge as they're operating. But you should make sure that they're all able to contribute and all able to take a charge, because it can cause problems, especially if you're used to having grid and now you don't, and you didn't realize you only had 2 out of your 4 batteries that were working, and now your grid goes out. So no, it's always a good idea to check on it and just make sure that they're all behaving.
How do I know when there's a problem?
Most of the time, you won't be able to power what you used to power. You put on a large load, and you'll get a overload warning on your inverter because one battery can't do it because it doesn't have any energy stored inside it, no power in it anymore. So then you'll know there's a problem. If you're closed loop communicating, you can get a warning like a battery status check or something that tells you that your battery is low, or has an error or it's cold, and then you'll know that there's a problem too. Lots of them have screens on them and lights. They have alarm lights and screens, and you can just go in and tap the screen and look at the voltage of every cell and see if it's in protection and all that. There are lots of ways to figure out if your battery has a problem.
Okay. So what would be the general process, troubleshooting process? Could you walk me through a general troubleshooting process to go through to just check and see what might be the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you suspect you have a battery that cannot charge or discharge like it should, you can always isolate it. That's a very good troubleshooting step. Isolate it, put it on the inverter or put it on a charger by itself. See if it still won't charge or discharge. See if it throws an alarm code. And then you can, lots of them have programs now where you can hook up to a computer, plug into the BMS, talk to it, and it will show you all of its cell voltages, any errors, all that kind of stuff, and any kind of alarms. And you can just basically talk to that computer with your computer, the battery computer with your computer, and get really good information about how to fix it.
And if I don't know how to do that on my own,
you call us. That's what we're for.
Call Technical Solutions.
Tech support. Yeah, that's right. And we'll not all of them. You can't talk to all of them, but all of the EG4s, a lot of batteries you can talk to, and you can just hook up to them and see what the computer says is going on. So.
And there's a step-by-step process that you guys can walk them through. And
Oh yeah, step-by-step process, and we can send you the cables for it and walk you through it and show you how to do it. So.
Okay. We have a question from AZ Mike. Is the easiest way to drain batteries on an off-grid system simply to disconnect the panels to the system?
Yeah, that is definitely the easiest way. And a lot of people struggle with that when they're trying to cycle because you can't just turn the sun off. So yeah, exactly right. You can just take your PV disconnect and flip it and discharge your battery all the way down, and then close that disconnect back up and let the power flow. And you just do that over and over. Yeah, exactly right.
How long typically does it take to completely cycle your battery?
It depends on your bank size and your loads. But however long it takes time-wise to cycle, the amount of cycles is the most important thing. So if you're when we tell people to deep cycle, we typically say 7 to 14 days. But if you're cycling a couple times a day, you don't have to do that. Just 7 to 14 cycles, 7 or 10 complete cycles. And that normally takes people a little bit, especially if you don't want to stay at your house and go out there and turn the disconnect off and on, several times a day. So it'll probably take a couple weeks for you to truly cycle it, but it's worth it because it makes it last a lot longer.
And does it matter if you have different brands?
All BMSs need to be calibrated. They all need to learn. They're the way you do that will be different though for different battery brands. Yeah.
Well, Phillip, this has been a really great discussion. I appreciate you breaking this all down for us. Battery maintenance is such an important part of keeping your system reliable and efficient. And to all of you joining in the conversation, thanks so much for sending us your questions. And we hope that we were able to help you out there with some of these answers that Phillip was able to answer for you. If this discussion was helpful, be sure and follow us so you don't miss the next episode of Amp Up. And also keep your eye out for an upcoming battery maintenance video where we feature our Tech Solutions team, where they're always happy to help you get the most out of your system. Thanks again for everybody joining us. We'll see you next time on Amp Up Solar Talk.